Hello, everyone. As she just mentioned, I am the co-author of Outside In, The Power of Putting Customers at the Center of Your Business, and I am also a regular contributor to Touchpoint. And I have this slide here because I have been watching the evolution of the field of customer experience for over a decade now, and the evolution of service design for the better part of a decade. And these two fields, the way that they kind of dance around each other and are intertwined with each other, has really impacted a lot of my thinking and a lot of the ways that I approach my own work and approach the research that I'm going to share with you today. And one of the commonalities between customer experience and service design is, of course, the interest in the journey that people go through, the ups and downs, and really understanding it from a holistic perspective. And I love what Flor showed earlier, that iceberg, because in fact this is not a mountain. This is an iceberg that has a very rich and deep organizational structure that is required to support it, and is also sometimes dangerous to what we see happening up on the surface of where the customer is interacting with us. So I want to talk more about the organizational issues that we are facing. But to do that, I want to take us back actually to pre-industrial revolution times, to the cottage industry, taking us back to England in the 18th century, where the goods that were manufactured were quite literally created in people's homes, in very small buildings, in cottages. And then, again, prior to the Industrial Revolution, we had a focus on craft making. And at this point, we were scaling up from cottage industry production, but we still had fairly rudimentary tools and processes that we were using. And then this guy came on the scene, Frederick Winslow Taylor. And he was essentially the world's first management consultant. He focused primarily on efficiency. And in 1911, he published this, The Principles of Scientific Management. You can still find this on Amazon if you want to pick up a copy and read through it. So Taylor spent a lot of time watching people do tasks like manually inspecting ball bearings and shoveling great piles of ore and lots of other fun things like that that people were doing back in the day. And his whole shtick was really around the division of labor, getting the right person into the right job, having specialization of skills, and letting all the planning and big thinking go to people who knew better. He really was a consultant. And so, not surprisingly, this led to what we know about Ford and Fordism, the development of assembly lines, really through to what we know today as our modern production, not only in terms of physical goods, but also in terms of the organizations and how we think about human resources. That term was coined back in this time of scientific revolution. And it also created the silos that we all know and love so well today. So silos get a bad rap in this group. And I understand why it is difficult to work across silos. Silos certainly have created a lot of impediments to delivering great experiences. But silos are incredibly valuable to our organizations today. Raise your hand if you work in a big organization. Yeah, most of you, right? Your organization would not exist without silos and specialization of skills. And so what I propose is that we don't want to think of silos as the enemy. We want to think of silos as something that we are working with. We need to find a way to work with silos to get the best of what silos offer us in terms of being able to scale, but also bringing in elements of a great experience that are missing in so many organizations today. So who can help with this? Who are we going to put the bat signal out to? Well, the first answer is chief customer officers. So this was a role that when I was at Forrester Research about a decade ago, we started talking about. And at that time, honestly, we didn't even know if chief customer officers were even going to exist. There were maybe like 2 or 3 of them at the time that we knew of. But as of last night, when I did my final LinkedIn search for these slides, there are about 6,000 of these. They take on some different titles: Chief Customer Officer, Chief Experience Officer. Sometimes it's also an SVP or an EVP of experience who is taking on kind of this lead role. But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of these folks out there in the world. And 6,000 may not seem like an enormous number, but if you think about the number of organizations that they are in, 6,000, and then think about the rest of their organization that is working for them, working on customer experience improvement efforts, this certainly does get to be a large number of people that they're commanding. But I've changed my thoughts on the Chief Customer Officer role over the years. I initially thought this was going to be the great silver bullet that would help usher in this new era of golden experiences. But in fact, it hasn't. It is a necessary first step. I'm not going to say anything against the role of the Chief Customer Officer. But as we know, change can't come just from the top. Change has to happen throughout the organization as well. And so that's where we come to the role of journey managers. And for me, this kind of makes sense because it really is journeys that are crossing all of these silos. Whether you're signing up for insurance, installing a product, canceling a subscription, whatever journeys your customers or members or patients or citizens are trying to go through, whatever goal they're trying to accomplish, they are crossing silos. And I know that yesterday there was some talk about whether or not journey maps are even valuable, and I'm happy to debate any given deliverable later on. And certainly there are a lot of things wrong in terms of how organizations are approaching deliverables around the journey in particular today. But I am a staunch believer in the power of the underlying framework of the journey. And I've got some data to back that up. So the first data point is going to show us, to borrow from Aristotle, that the journey is greater than the sum of the parts. So this research comes from McKinsey. Thank you very much to them for doing this. This first research was with a media company that they looked at, and I couldn't quite tell what the media company was exactly, but I'm imagining it's something in the area of internet, TV, because this journey involved about 9 different phone calls. It involved at least 1 visit to the person's home from a technician. It involved multiple website visits and emails. And when this organization looked at any single individual touch point, they found that customer satisfaction was quite high. About 90% satisfaction with each individual touch point. But when they looked at this journey from an end-to-end perspective, and this was the journey of onboarding, it took about 3 months to accomplish this journey. And when they looked at customer satisfaction over that 3-month period, it was 40% lower. So it is not enough just to be looking at individual touch points, individual interactions. We must look at how all of these different interactions string together to form journeys that support what our customers are trying to do. And the next couple of data points I'll share with you show that journeys and not individual touch points predict business success. So this slide, the data is a little bit wonky. What you're looking at here are R-squared values that are the result of a multiple regression analysis. I'm not going to get into all the math here. All you need to know is that the blue lines are longer than the green lines. And what the blue lines signify are journeys. And the fact that they are longer than the green lines are showing us that journeys are better predictors than touch points are at predicting customer satisfaction and on the right willingness to recommend. And this was true for 4 different industries that they looked at. This next slide's a little bit easier to grok because we like financial slides that go up and to the right, and that's essentially what this is. Looking at companies within the pay TV and the auto insurance industry, we've got their average satisfaction with 3 key journeys along the x-axis, and then the y-axis is revenue growth. And so you can see that there is a correlation between satisfaction with journeys and revenue growth. And in fact, McKinsey was able to pinpoint that a 1-point improvement in satisfaction on a 10-point scale corresponds to at least a 3 percentage point increase in the revenue growth rate. And so this is huge. This is really an indication that we need to be focusing on journeys. And so I went and I talked to someone who was a journey manager at a major US telecom. And she was telling me about a problem that they had. They uncovered about 1,500 different tactics across the organization for contacting customers. And these included emails, texts, calls, direct mails. And because there were so many of them, they just were not relevant. And in fact, they were overwhelming to customers. Even worse, they found that there was a correlation between these feelings of being overwhelmed, of feeling like the organization was not relevant to them. There was a correlation between those feelings and opt-out and churn. And so they knew that they had to do something about this, and they took a journey-focused approach. So what she set up was a system that required each of 20 different departments to plot their planned communications against key journeys, things like being on eligible for an upgrade, things like being on a lease that is about to end, things like being a high-risk customer, someone who perhaps has called in to cancel service in the past and so is kind of on a watch list, different journeys related to their business, things that were having a direct impact on revenue. Everyone who was doing this, excuse me, had to show the ROI of past efforts and predict future ROI of the communications that they were proposing. And they also had to think through how these different journeys overlapped, because someone who was a high-risk customer might also be eligible for an upgrade. And they needed to make sure that these journeys kind of dovetailed with each other seamlessly. This was something that they reinforced. They actually put a governance board into place that forced people to take this journey-centric approach. And based on all of this work, they were able to personalize communications for each individual user based on the journeys that that user was on. And the net effect was a 3% drop in customer churn in 6 months. So this got me really excited, thinking that yes, this journey management role might really have legs. And so I went back to LinkedIn, and the first thing that I did was a search for product managers. And I did this because I had some feeling that there was a relationship between product management and journey management. It seemed to me like kind of the same task, just with a different focus. And Zachary yesterday kind of confirmed this for me. He said, oh, you can manage a journey, you can manage a product, it's just a different focus. But the fact of the matter is, there are tons of product managers out there, about 1.4 million. When you do a search for journey managers, you're going to find 1,300. And again, this is data from just the other day. So we are really, really in early times thinking about this journey management role. But I'm actually really encouraged by this number because it represents 20% year-over-year growth from when I was tracking these numbers a year ago. So I believe that this role of the journey manager is really going to take off over the next few years and is perhaps even going to have a bigger impact on our organizations than the introduction of the Chief Customer Officer did about a decade ago. So when I went to LinkedIn, I did a little bit of a deeper dive. I didn't just search for journey managers and leave it at that. I actually went out and scoured over 400 journey manager profiles. These were people who hold the current journey manager role. If you want to go do this yourself, there are some journey managers out there, primarily in the Middle East and some in Africa as well, who are not the type of journey manager that I'm talking about. They are responsible for ensuring the safety of very valuable goods as they journey from point A to point B. So you might see a few of those out there. You want to exclude them from what you're looking at. But for the journey managers that we're talking about, again, we looked at over 400 of these. And these are just some of the many, many companies that are hiring them. Royal Bank of Scotland, is there anyone from RBS in the room? I don't see anyone. They have about 70 of these people currently employed. So I'm dying to talk to Royal Bank of Scotland to see how that's going for them. But also it's another interesting data point for me that they probably wouldn't be investing in this so much if they didn't see some value in it. Okay, so then I looked at what industries these various organizations came from. Not surprisingly, the overwhelming majority of them came from banking and financial services. This is really when I was tracking kind of the early days of customer experience as a discipline within organizations. Banking and financial services were some of the early adopters of customer experience practices. So not surprising that we're seeing them at the top of the list. By the way, I'm going to present some eye charts here. I apologize for the small text. I'm going to give you a link at the end of this presentation where you can download these slides. So feel free to take pictures, but if you're squinting a little bit, we'll make sure to get you all the data. Okay. So when I looked at where they are physically hiring these folks, England came out on top, so over 30% of the journey managers, yeah, go England, early adopters. Scotland not far behind. I think most of the journey managers in Scotland are hired by Royal Bank of Scotland. And then we had a few from Northern Ireland and Wales as well, so overall, almost half of them hail from the UK. So yeah, I see lots of smiles out there in the audience, and certainly I think I'm just going to have to park myself over in this part of the world for a while to complete this research. One thing that was kind of surprising / a little embarrassing for me as someone who lives in San Francisco is that Belgium actually has the same number as the United States. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but obviously a really, really strong focus in Europe overall. Well over 70% of our journey managers come from Europe. Yeah, so why is this guy crying? He's from Antarctica. There's no journey managers in Antarctica yet. But we do see journey managers, at least a handful of them, on every other continent. All right, so again, just taking my view of customer experience and service design into mind here, one of the things that I noticed about these two disciplines is that they kind of started and then branched out from different geographical centers. So customer experience as a discipline, I really saw taking hold in the United States and then kind of traveling to Europe and traveling to other parts of the world. And with service design, it's really been the opposite. Service design clearly has its roots in Europe and has branched out to the US, North America, and the rest of the world. And so having this background in mind, when I layer this slide on top of what we saw on the other slide with how many journey managers are located in Europe, my hypothesis is that this is really stemming from more of a service-designed mindset service design mindset more so than a customer experience mindset. And this is a hypothesis that I'm going to be testing out in my upcoming research. So we'll see kind of how strongly these journey managers land in one camp or the other. I, of course, also wanted to look at journey managers' professional and educational backgrounds. So when we looked at their overall career experience, the majority of them had between 5 and 15 years of experience, so kind of early career folks, early to mid-career folks. These are their bachelor's degree areas of focus. Not surprising to me, business and marketing, communications and media, economics and international business were some of the top areas of focus here. But really, we saw journey managers coming from just about every possible area of study that you could possibly think of. When we looked at the numbers of people who had various degrees, 72% hold a bachelor's degree, 26% hold a master's degree, and 1% hold a PhD. And when we looked at those people who had master's degrees and PhDs in really specific areas, something like sports management, it didn't really seem that their area of focus translated directly into their work as a journey manager. But again, certainly something to look into as to how these advanced degrees are really helping people in their journey management roles. Okay, so kind of the core question is, what are journey managers' primary roles and responsibilities? And again, I had some hypotheses coming into this, that this role would be similar to what we see in product managers. One of the first things that I wanted to look at, though, was whether or not these journey managers were holding concurrent roles. So one of the things that we saw with customer experience when people started having the term customer experience in their title is that it was kind of a part-time gig. I'm doing XYZ in marketing or XYZ in product development, and I'm also doing something related to customer experience. Well, the fact of the matter is that just did not cut it. It wasn't until people had, organizations had dedicated customer experience roles, people had full-time customer experience responsibilities, that we really started to see their work take hold within organizations. And so I think what we're seeing with the data here, 60% not having concurrent roles, so those are people that are in dedicated positions, and then 40% in those roles concurrently with some other job responsibilities. I think this is a matter of, again, this being kind of early days for journey management. I bet if we looked at all of those product managers that are out there on LinkedIn, a very small percentage of them would say, I'm a product manager and something else as well. So that little teeny tiny piece of the pie that you see up at the top, that is 5% of the 40%, in addition to being journey managers, are product managers. So maybe that contradicts a little bit of what I just said, but there is a little bit of overlap there. Unfortunately, with the way that we captured the data, I don't have information on whether or not these journey managers were product managers in previous roles. But again, that's something I'm going to be looking at to see if there's some kind of evolution there. Okay, so how long have they been in their current journey manager role? The overall answer is not very long. So the most common answer, over 30%, said they had been in their role from 1 to less than 2 years. So this is, again, early days. This isn't surprising. I would imagine most of these people are in newly created journey management roles that organizations are just starting to implement and hire for. I was kind of curious about some of the folks who said, oh, I've been in this role for 5 to 10 years or 10 years or more. I actually talked to a couple of these folks, and I think this is an anomaly with how people track their employment history on LinkedIn. Some people write down every single title they've had within an organization, and some people just list their last title. And so I know at least a few of those people who have been at this for 10 or more years. It's just that they've been at their current companies for 10 or more years and in their position for probably a year or so. So 17% of the journey managers that we looked at had previous journey management experience. This is their time in previous journey manager roles. So again, not super long, not a long time that this role has really been around and people have been sussing out what the heck they're supposed to do. Now, one of the other things that we looked at was whether or not these journey managers were typically internal hires or being hired from the outside. 57%, so a good chunk, over half, were internal hires, and this is how long they had been in their companies overall. So this is something that we feel is important. It is going to allow journey managers to really make headway in their organizations by leveraging the relationships that they have. And again, this is all about crossing silos, so people that have been in the organization for longer will have developed relationships across all those different groups. Now, I'm not gonna go into all of these different job descriptions. I've got a few pages of text-based slides here, but essentially, what these journey managers are tasked with doing is pretty much what I thought they would have been tasked with doing. They are looking to improve the overall customer experience and improve their business results as a result of that. Strategy was one of the key areas of focus when we looked at, again, the text that people put in their LinkedIn job descriptions. So creating a vision for what the journey should be. They are also, of course, responsible for implementation. And I was interested to see that more than a handful of them had some mention of agile, lean, continuous improvement in their job responsibilities as well. And this also correlates with what I heard anecdotally from some of the interviews that I've been conducting. Collaboration is key. Again, not surprisingly, we've got to connect people from across the organization. So the ability to work with others and build those bridges is really important. And I like this last one. This role is dependent on collaborating with the wider analytics team. And that definitely pulls into one of the other major responsibilities that we saw in people's job descriptions around measurement. Measuring the journey, making sure that we're not just creating a vision, but that we are implementing it in a way that is having results. So I just want to talk very briefly about journey analytics because this is something that is, again, growing in terms of not only kind of buzzwordiness, but I think in terms of value to organizations. So just a few snapshots here. This first one comes from ClickFox, and what you're looking at here is a data-driven journey, looking at how people are going from one touch point to the next to the next. This particular screenshot happens to be all web-based interactions, but ClickFox is able to pull in data from any other channel that you're measuring, the call center, web chats, mobile, whatever it is, and pull it in so that you can understand the primary paths that your customers are taking. You can see all the different pathways here, and then you can see the main one, which is called out in purple. There are lots of different ways to think about journey analytics. I like this slide from Clarabridge. It's not proprietary and confidential. I don't know why it says it. They very happily gave me this slide to share with you. But the idea is that not every journey is going to have the same data to draw from, to measure. And so we need to think about, for any given journey, what data do we have at our disposal, and how can we think of leveraging that to measure the journey in some meaningful way? And then this next slide also comes from Clarabridge. This is a screenshot of one of their dashboards where they've got color coding for things are going well, things are not going well, according to different phases of the journey and different channels. But what's really interesting about this is that if you click on any one of these different areas of the dashboard, you can actually dig into real customer data. So this is a living dashboard and a living look at how the journey is performing. So as we think about this journey management role overall, I go back to the iceberg diagram. And I think it's sometimes easy to think about designing the journey itself and then managing the organization that's responsible for delivering it. I would say we've got to both design and manage the journey, and design and manage the organization as well. And that's really kind of, if I had to sum it up, what the role of the journey manager is all about. So very quickly, I know I'm out of time, but if you're looking to hire journey managers, I have just a few words of advice for you. The first is a few don'ts. Don't waste time looking for candidates with advanced degrees, journey management experience, unless you're in Europe and England especially, or even product management experience. What you want to look for are people who are skilled in some of those key skills that I talked about, some of the key functions of the journey manager: strategy, ability to create a vision, collaboration, measurement, certainly able to take a keen eye to the numbers part of the management piece. And also, don't get sucked into the buzzword. There's one company that I spoke with where the head of sales essentially took his entire team and renamed them all journey managers because he thought it sounded better and more customer focused. They're all now in the process of being renamed back to their previous titles. But don't get sucked into the buzzword. We're really in early days with this, and we need to make sure that we're creating these roles with some intention and integrity. And finally, a few do's, advice for hiring managers. Do consider internal candidates. Again, they are already blessed with all of the relationships that they have across the organization, are really well suited to do the type of work that's required. Do make this a full-time role. Do empower your journey managers and demand accountability. This is not going to be an effective role unless we truly empower and make these people accountable. Some of the journey managers we looked at even said they had full P&L responsibility. And finally, ask for help. It really is kind of the wild, wild west out there. There are a lot of different types of journey managers. No two journey managers I looked at were the same. And I am devoting the next year of my professional life to really understanding this role and helping organizations integrate it into their organizations. So as I promised, you can get the slides at kerrybodine.com/SDGC18, Service Design Global Conference 18. And the report that shares the findings in a little more depth than I was able to get into today is at kerrybodine.com/journeymanagers18. Thank you very much.